Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast. This is your host, Brennan Catuli. We are here today for episode number 42 with Adelle Deriquito. Adelle is a counselor within the area of Silver Spring, Maryland. Adelle has a Master's of Arts within counseling. She is a yoga teacher in training. As well, she likes to focus on the concepts of mind, body, soul, the mind-body connection, compassion. She likes to work within her clients to develop coping strategies and techniques that empower oneself within their own mental, physical, emotional health. As well, she likes to bring openness, reflectiveness, and grace within her environment in order to bring about steps to move forward within one's own health. Adelle shares some incredible perspectives within the field of mental health today and some opportunities that she is doing right now to change the conversation about mental health, maybe some others where we can really dive into to even change the conversation more. I loved my conversation with Adelle because she was just so aware and insightful about how we see mental health today, and she is a young and up-and-coming therapist within the field that I believe has a bright future to make the positive change that we need within the mental health field. Please tune in to this episode with Adelle as she speaks about some important topics such as the importance of mental health, the aspects of breathing and its impact on our nervous system, how to truly become self-aware, the benefits of emotional intelligence, and steps that we can improve not only children, young adults, but also adults' mental health within our society today. Thank you all for listening to this episode of the Mental Insights Podcast. I hope you all enjoy this episode. Please share any insights that you find throughout this conversation. Thank you for listening to the Mental Insights Podcast. This is your host, Brennan Catuli. We are here today for episode number 42 of the Mental Insights Podcast with Adelle Deriquito. Adelle, thank you for taking this time out with me. I appreciate you being here on the Mental Insights Podcast.
For having me.
My pleasure. And, the start of the podcast, I really like to get a good glimpse about, your own perspective about the topic to give a good understanding of where we're going to move throughout this episode. And that being, when did you first become aware of the importance of mental health and why it was a big factor within your own life in terms of studying it and being a part of the field?
This is a good question, which I think for most people very loaded as it comes down to like personal and professional things. For me, I've always been interested in psychology when I was in high school, always interested in the mind. But when I studied it in college, I started also volunteering. And through my volunteering experience, I started to see mental health as really important, as opposed to just research. I think applying sort of like the community aspect to mental health, started to see that, especially in areas of poverty. I dedicated my time as a drama club teacher for battered women and children for some time, and after school programs. And I thought I wanted to be a teacher because I started to see that teachers were oftentimes the first responders to trauma. And we don't have a lot of conversations about that social and emotional intelligence. And I think that when I started to realize just like the impact that it had, like setting them up for success later on, I started to realize that I wanted to go into mental health so I can target it that way, early preventatives and those aspects. And I think also just my personality, I feel like I'm more of a one-to-one person. So it just really fit with basically my interest and also what I was seeing out in these different systems.
Thank you for sharing that. And, to really build off that, I think, you brought up such, I think, misled and not a conversation that's spoken about too much is the aspect of trauma and the abilities that social and emotional learning can really be a factor, and especially implementing that at a young age for children. Can you speak about just the effects that trauma can have on mental health and why we should be implementing these at a younger age rather than, waiting for therapeutic sessions that are 10, 15 years later after the traumatic experience?
All right. So everyone's going to be shaped by their early childhood experiences. That's just a given. And a lot of the times in impoverished schools and in areas where they don't get a lot of resources or support, we tend to think, okay, like, let's try to make these test scores higher, like let's note like zero tolerance policies, and we start to implement things that are not targeting the real issues. And when I started to work in schools, I started to realize that like some of these students, what they need, and research continues to support the idea that we need to learn to co-regulate with these children, and that early childhood mentors and people who are in their lives helps them build resilience. And if they're going through these traumatic experiences, like adversity is going to play a role in the way that they are able to concentrate in school. So we're not looking at ADHD all the time, although like in our society right now, it's heavily prescribed. And so we're not really looking at what meets the needs of the students, the need for them to feel safe and connected, and how to regulate those emotions. Like when someone experiences trauma, like it could be abuse, it could be neglect at home, it could be a number of things. But when they have an increased number of traumatic experiences, their prefrontal cortex and their executive functioning, they're not going to be able to concentrate. They're not going to be able to self-regulate. They won't even be aware of what's going on in their body. We don't have these conversations in school. We have conversations about why are they not coming to school, or why are they acting out. We oftentimes punish these students as opposed to, really try to understand where they're coming from and to target, those aspects of support as opposed to continuing to punish behavior that is deeply rooted in trauma.
It's such an important conversation to have because, like you're saying, there's really we're seeing it from a different lens, and for most, I think, still in society today, we're using a route that's kind of demeaning and bringing people down for experiencing these issues when, especially at a child's age, that's not something that they could truly have power or control over. And certainly there is still some trauma based throughout people's later life, but a lot of people are experiencing these periods of emotional neglect or abuse that is happening at an early age. And you spoke about there's techniques or there's different ways that we can help to really build upon the learning for a child to learn how to respond effectively, to learn how to find coping mechanisms that are right for them. And, what are some tools and some tricks that we can use within an education system to allow for children to, find ways to, whether it's be more aware or mindful of, how to heal in terms of some of these traumas that are affecting them?
So the thing that you mentioned, I think is really important, is that they don't have control of these things a lot of the times. So it really starts from teachers being informed from the top. They need to be aware of how trauma works, and they have to be able to create like conflict resolution within classrooms. Because if teachers are not being as effective, because they too, like for stakeholders, right? Like a lot of money is going to be spent on trying to like implement things that are not continuing to work. So teachers have to be trained in what trauma looks like. They have to also be able to be trained in co-regulation. In some schools, they have peace corners as opposed to like timeout corners. They have wellness practices and mindfulness in other countries implemented in schools already. Having them aware of like what they can do helps to regulate the children as well. And then they can help practice through different kind of mindfulness techniques that are available to children as well. And they can make this fun and open-ended. It doesn't necessarily always have to be super serious either, because children need to be able to express themselves. So a lot of creative funding being cut because they don't understand that this is like having meaningful learning experiences is what's going to help them build resilience. It's what's going to help them set up for academic success, because if they are not making those connections to others and to themselves, then they're not going to be set up for a bright future, because we need them to be able to concentrate. We need them to be able to tolerate stress, which is common in any environment. So with my children that I counsel, I do mindfulness techniques with them, and they're open to it. And obviously not right away. I used to have a client, he was around 8 years old, and he had anger outbursts. And so obviously we didn't start with like yoga or meditation or anything like that, but it started with education. Like I had to educate on it, him on what feelings were versus emotions and how to communicate that, because he didn't know what was going on in his body, and neither did his parents. But his parents were responsible for understanding what was going on with him and how to communicate with him about these things without continuing to reinforce kind of the punishments that were not helping. They were just making him feel worse about what he was experiencing in his body, because he didn't know how to regulate that from very early on. And it's possible, but it takes education from the top.
Exactly. It's such a valuable, thing to speak about, because, the way that our society works is how you're stating is, if somebody, has poor behavior or has poor emotions throughout their time at school, they're often, put in timeout. They're often, punished for these outbursts, for these behavior issues, when really that should be, the route where we're starting to heal and where we're starting to reach out to these children and see that they need our help, not that they need to go, sit in a corner and then just build up more of this angst and outburst that they're going to bring upon, someone down the line. And the opportunities to do some of these mindfulness activities is obviously the goal of it, but the education part is first and foremost, and why we don't implement some things just to even learn how to cope with different emotions, or to know what these emotions even mean. I think, when you see a lot of the positive and negative emotions that people like to play, it's, I don't think many people have the, such as the term emotional intelligence. Like, emotional intelligence and self-awareness is something that we could severely focus on. And if we help build children at a younger age, then I think we'll have less troubles when you see the periods of 18 to 25 where there's some of the worst mental health issues that we're facing throughout the world. So, we're not really building up many of like the youth to be able to succeed in many ways. And
yeah, emotional intelligence is something you have to learn. It's not something that like we are born knowing. It's cultural. It's impacted by the people we grow up with, and it can be learned throughout life. Like we are very adaptive, but it's also hard to change if we don't know how to. Like, we are not given those tools.
Yeah, that's the one effect of when you have different, home environments, different community environments. They all play large factors within, our own health, within our own awareness. And I think one thing that is a great mindfulness activity that you can touch on is just the ability to practice breathing exercises. Can you speak upon that, and how that can interact with our own mind, our own brain, in terms of being aware, being present, and not allowing external factors to change the way we think or behave at the ready moment?
Right. So all of this really ties together, like self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and our nervous system, right, and breathing, because so when we experience traumatic events, our autonomic nervous system, which is like very briefly, it is hijacked. So those involuntary organs like our heart, muscles, and all those that's responsible for, helping us breathe, helping us to digest, they're not properly responding, especially if you've had multiple complex trauma or sexual trauma. All of these things, like, it tells us fight or flight, like our sympathetic nervous system responses are not properly working. When we don't have direct control of our autonomic nervous systems, but when we're breathing, right, when we breathe in, for example, it helps us to increase the energy or increase the feelings of, okay, like, and then when you breathe out, the parasympathetic nervous system of rest and digestion, like of the feeling of peace, that starts to set in. There's so many different breathing techniques out there, and some of them help to energize that nervous system, and some of them helps to regulate, to calm you. A very simple one would be like box breathing, which is something that you can do with children. Like, it's you can use visuals and use like a box. You inhale and then you hold, and then you exhale and then you hold. And when we do these kind of things, it allows us to calm ourselves, and then the message is going to the prefrontal cortex, which is our executive functioning, instead of reacting to emotions or reacting to whatever we think is happening in our body. Because if you've had experiences with trauma, you don't know what's going on. You don't necessarily even trust it. So you respond, you learn how to respond, you take a step back from that. And obviously these things take practice, like it takes a rewiring in our system. But when we can learn to breathe, we already have a tool right there to be able to help us manage things. And they show, right, that like a lot of children who get into a lot of trouble are the ones that are very impulsive. Antisocial behaviors come from this too. Like, we misdiagnose very often conduct disorder because these children just don't know how to regulate themselves. And a lot of the times it takes slowing down. And if we can teach children how to breathe, we can teach them how to start to regulate their emotions and to really reflect.
It's truly a profound conversation, as it's something that we do at every moment, yet many people are not aware enough to use it as that tool, to center themselves, to ground themselves. And oftentimes people lose sight of that, so much of that. If you just go back to your breath, you can, forget every worry, every, anxious moment, any type of, negative experience that you've had by just being with your breath and practicing some of these breathing techniques. Many people experience some of the same things through yoga, through meditation. And, why don't you speak more about just the impact that something even such as yoga can change someone's, mindset, and change someone's just ability to be present and to reflect within their own life?
I think when I started doing yoga, well, I started meditating first. So it was a lot of the cognitive centering. And then when I started to move into meditation and then breathing and then yoga, what I started to realize is that there is a profound way of becoming aware of like the connection between your mind and body. And how whenever your mind is really busy, your body feels that way too. And then if you can do it either way. Like, if you move your body, your mind, like if you can still your body, you can still your mind, and if you can still your mind, you can still your body. And with yoga, it's allowed me to coordinate my breathing with the poses. And I think yoga is, I think that like a lot of times, like it is often misunderstood as just like this fitness, like a fitness thing. But yoga is really helpful for helping us to ground ourselves in the present moment and enabling us to, to realize like, okay, I don't have to be pulled away by every thought. Or I don't have to necessarily the lessons I take on the mat, off the mat. And a lot of the times it allows me to check in with myself. So it's a self-care tool. And again, too, I feel like it goes a lot with self-awareness. whatever I'm experiencing in that moment. Like if I can't even get myself to do some yoga that day, I have to wonder why. Like I have to wonder like what is keeping me like from being able to just sit with myself or to move in these ways. It really has a way of making you realize too, like the intelligence of emotions, like the wisdom that it holds. I think that like a lot of the times, like that client that I had brought up, we learned that some emotions are scary, and we feel that in our body. That's the difference between emotions and feelings. Emotions are they tell us things. Feelings are just the way that we associate those emotions with different things. But if we can put a word to it, and with breathing and yoga, I think it kind of dispels all of that. It allows me to be in the flow with those things and to really move through it. And I think that's a simple way of putting it, but
No, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad you explained it that way, because it truly is more than just the exercise. It's more than just, the act of moving, and it does a lot mentally for many people. And Alan Watts states it as, you don't have to meditate sitting down and just closing your eyes. Meditation can be anything as long as you're fully engaged and present within the act. So it can be walking in nature, it can be yoga. There's many different forms that you can meditate, but it's about centering yourself, and it's about, releasing some of those thoughts, letting them still come in, but allowing you to, find that center point, find that balance. And I think that's what's, the great thing about yoga, is because you can be exercising and you can find that mind-body connection so presently within any type of different movement or different, form that you place within the exercise. And I think that's why it should be seen more as, more as really connecting the mind and body, which is something that is really been researched a lot already, but is coming out even more in terms of, the profoundness within nutrition and within exercising, and, how you're taking care of both sides of the spectrum. And you brought up the importance of self-awareness and being aware enough to question yourself about maybe why you're not doing something or why you're doing something in a certain way. And certainly within self-awareness, it's not something that you just have, or it's not something that just concretely changes. So can you speak about just how the steps for someone to move forward and start to becoming more aware and start to question, some of these aspects within their own life?
right. Self-awareness it's super fascinating to me. Well, the self, right? Like that's what we're all interested in. Because there's different aspects of self-awareness that we often confuse, like self-consciousness and your internal dialogue, like what is happening in my mind, or questioning like it's not necessarily judging yourself. And we have different levels of self-awareness. Like we have our narratives, like our autobiographical narratives of like, okay, like I grew up in this culture, like this is my age, like I know these aspects of myself. But then there's also like self-awareness when it comes to being in this moment, like here and now. Am I aware of myself here, physically? And how do I learn to communicate those aspects of myself? I'm like, oh, so I know, because both are important. We can't, like in some forms of meditation, we learn to detach from it, even if we are aware of it. I understand my attachment styles. Like I have that awareness of like why I respond this way. And I think that's what's most important about developing self-awareness, is so that you can choose to show up wisely in your life. Like you can choose to be intentional. Like if I didn't know what my values were, then I might be in a job I didn't really like. And then, I have to go to therapy or something. Like the question is always, who am I? And we're always exploring that, and we're always constantly changing. And self-awareness is also a process of that too. So we don't just like, okay, this is who I am now, and now I'm one and done. It's always coming back to like, what is true to me? Not what people are telling me, not necessarily like what I grew up with. But like, how can I change and show up like in a way that makes me feel good about myself? And I think that's, that ties in with emotional intelligence and just being able to communicate to yourselves, to those parts of yourselves. which sounds really meta, like, okay, there's different parts of ourselves, but I mean, essentially we have all these different aspects to us. We're very layered, and really diving into that is a lifelong process, which is very beautiful, and I think can be very fruitful for somebody who it feels lost. Is to know that like we're all on that journey of like self-discovery, and I think it's a good thing to feel that way.
I completely agree, and I love the way that you framed it. It truly is profound, because for many, they're in a place where they get lost, whether it's in their work life or they get lost when they're a child due to trauma, and they think that there's really no hope. There's no light out of the tunnel that they're in. And once they're able to just look within themselves, when they're able to dive into, the self-development, self-discovery, and start using some of these tools, that's when they truly see how grateful they can be and how, just beautiful their life is, based on just that reframing of the context of their own life and changing, their perspective of what they went through and why that can help them move forward, which I think is so profound. And it's certainly very hard for people to open up to that perspective and find that window. But I think it's once they do, once they question, once they look into themselves, that's where really the most, the true powerful message happens within others' lives. And, the aspect to coincide, you spoke a little bit about emotional intelligence and understanding the impact that emotions can have, and how, what techniques and how can someone use, their own awareness in order to see how their emotions come into play. So understanding just their emotional responses, or, how they use their emotions in a positive or negative light. And, how can they combine the self-awareness and emotional intelligence to understand?
So yeah, that's a good question. It's very concrete. Something that I really liked about what you said was, that it's hard. It's definitely something like when you get to that point, right? When you have to be honest and willing and open. Of course, as a counselor and as a big believer in psychotherapy, I really think that it's important to be able to exercise the changes that you feel and what you're starting to discover about yourself in a relationship and in the context of a safe environment. So if anybody is in that like place where they don't, you don't have to do it alone, and we heal through relationships, and we also experience trauma through relationships, but we heal through them too. So, having a support system, having people who give you external feedback to like what you're experiencing inside, and having it in a way that is safe and open is helpful. I know for myself personally, when I started seeing a therapist, that's when I learned a lot about myself. When I started to realize, okay, so how am I showing up in my life? Not just like from my own internal narrative, but like also like getting that kind of feedback and being honest, because that exploration allows a lot of courage to be reflective, and it's ongoing. So I really think that like if you want to be able to exercise those changes, it's helpful to get professional help sometimes. You can also do like kinds of meditations that are conducive of self-awareness in a non-attached way. It's not the same as rumination, and that's why I make that distinction. But I think it's really important to dive into kind of it's a vulnerable place to be in, to kind of like it's like layers of you, like you are an onion and you're being peeled. And I think that's why it's important to have kind of a place to do that, to exercise those newfound insights. And that's really the key.
Yeah, I think that's why therapy is so recommended. It's so needed. And obviously within the need for it, there certainly needs to be more mental health professionals within the field in order for us to, help and assist all of the people that are struggling today. But for anyone listening, what is your advice and what is your clarity within what you've experienced and what you do now for someone to reach out to get help that hasn't seen the aspect of therapy, or maybe they have gone to one session and they told themselves they're never going to go again? What would you want to say to them right now to offer a piece of advice?
That's super common, right? It's like a lot of people will go into therapy maybe when they were younger, or maybe they were forced to or something, or just trying it out and they didn't like that experience. Um, Therapy it's important to find somebody you connect with. Maybe like we don't know right away, but I think we know. Like when we were like, we can give people chances, but therapy is about you. Like it is about you. So it is important that you learn to realize, okay, like maybe you don't know what's good for you then, or you do, but like there's that the connection that you build with a therapist, and you have to be able to trust this person. Like you have to ask yourself, okay, can I see myself opening up to them? Maybe not like in the first 3 sessions or something, but you have to find someone you click with, because you're going to go to places that you don't want to go to, if you really want to grow and change, and that's what it takes. But I think that being willing, and being curious about it, as opposed to judgmental, like it's a hard process. Like it's not easy telling a stranger things about ourselves, let alone people we really care about. But they're there for you, and if you find the right therapist, there's also resources online. I really recommend people research, like just briefly, what is a sign of a good therapist, because I mean there's a lot of research on there that shows that, and very simply stated, I think it's somebody who allows you to be heard. Like they are not telling you what to do, because therapy should also be a place where you feel empowered to make those decisions. And again, if culturally it's not something that you feel empowered to do right away, it's something you can learn too. But you have to be able to trust the person that you are talking to, or get the sense that like this might be a person that I can click with. It's like an interview, but again, like it's for you.
Thank you for that, Adele. And it really is true, because oftentimes there are many types of therapists that aren't really the best for you. They don't bring out, how you can really be comfortable and be honest with them. And, unfortunately, that's why you need to have these test runs. You need to have these interviews, as you say, to really see who's going to be best for you. And it changes throughout how you change as well. You could have a therapist for 2 years and you grow out into a new being, and maybe you need a different kind of therapy or a different person to be there for you. And we speak about a lot of the different aspects of whether it's actual professional services or it's techniques that you can use on the side. But we spoke a little bit about how we can, bring in emotional or social learning within, whether it's school systems or whether it's someplace at the youth. But, what else can we do? What could we put into place, whether it's in education systems or elsewhere, to, provide a service for people to get educated on, whether it's children or whether it's young adults? How can we help to educate more people at a profound level, rather than, just online, just through podcasts, just through blogs? How can we truly get this message out in a more profound way?
The first thing that came to me was probably like the grassroots approach, which is that there are, like, we have school counselors, right? Like we have people in communities already that are working directly with these students. But, as I was almost going to be a school counselor, but I realized that they also have a lot of other roles and hats that they have to play when they're in the schools. So even like counselors in private practice, I would recommend like going out there and talking to these schools and connecting with them, show like there, because there are so many programs that we don't like know who to tell. So I think starting in your community, like starting in places where like we think like maybe these people might like this might be beneficial to them. We never know if we don't ask and like go out there and connect with people on that level. We are very used to just being like on the computer and try to talk to people that way, but there are people around us that need help, and they don't know where to get it. But if we are out there like already providing it, or like going to people, then we can increase that awareness and have these conversations, and not keep it within, you know, the bubble of like, we understand these things, but and there's people out there who don't. And so just making sure that we are taking those steps, and just continuing to have these kind of conversations, I think, is important.
It certainly is. I completely agree. And I value this conversation and as we're speaking, because it continues to bring about the conversation that we need within the mental health community and within, moving forward and providing these resources. And, hopefully throughout these conversations, we can allow for people to, bring programs to where they need and hopefully build upon many of the services that we have today. Within, really encompassing all of that you've experienced, I love to ask this question to my guests to bring about their own experiences, their own lessons as they've learned throughout. And I want you to really wrap your whole life within a book. And I want you to bring about a certain chapter that was a profound experience, lesson, something that was really powerful within your own life that you can leave the audience and let them know why this was such an important moment within your life, whether it was leading you to be within the mental health field, whether it's, really allowed you to dig deeper into pushing your message within mental health, or just something that changed your own perspective within your life and to, be your own self. To please share that with the audience, that would be wonderful.
It's a very good question, very hard question to answer too, because there's so many moments, when I feel like for me and finding myself in mental health, it was always there. Like there was always moments where I was like, I'm very interested in like this theory and this, like I said, I was interested in psychology, but as far as moving in this direction, I think probably when I met my mentor, he was this man who just volunteered all over Chicago and would take me and a bunch of people to do that. He was like the kindest person you would ever meet. And he would just I don't really know how he got paid or did any of that, but he made that happen because what he believed is that people wanted to help. They just didn't know how. And so he made it his job to take people to these different volunteering events. And, then we'd hang out after. I had a really good sense of community then. But at that time, right, like I was like a sophomore in college, and I was studying psychology, and I was also having my own issues. Like there was just so many things going on in my life, but I always came to like, but I can help someone else, like, and I can be part of this community, not like all the other mess and all the other drama in my life kind of just faded away. Like I was like, I could serve somehow. And I think that was really profound for me. And I think that when we can get to that place of like, how do I connect to more people? Like, how does, like, what I really start to realize is like, there are people who instill confidence in you by the way they treat you. And what I want people to like take from this is that there are so many people struggling through different things, but if we realize like, okay, we're all kind of struggling in it, and how can we help other people too, even despite that, is really eye-opening, and it really helps you feel connected and realize too that like, the world isn't so bad. And that takes a long time to realize those kind of things, and so to also be patient and compassionate with yourself, and in realizing that like it's not something you learn overnight, and it's not, I don't think like maybe choosing to be a therapist was not something I also like again like chose like that, like maybe when I put in my application, but it really changes you to connect to people and to look at the reality of stuff within yourself and with others.
Thank you so much for that answer, Adele. I appreciate it. And it brings about such an important topic of that sense of community, which I think is so important within anybody's mental health. You spoke about how truly impactful relationships can be. Certainly we do experience trauma from relationships, but we heal through relationships. And that, what I think is such an important, thing to value is, that sense of community for anyone out there to, find, whether it's friends, different volunteer opportunities. There's so many ways that we can get connected within our community. And, sometimes serving others is what brings, that joy and that sense of relief within our life. So it's definitely such a valuable thing to have in place. And I'm so thankful that you were able to take this time with me on the Mental Insights podcast. You were the 42nd guest, so it's such a pleasure to have you on here. And I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. So thank you for taking this time out with me, Adelle.
Yeah, thank you. I love these kind of conversations, and I really appreciate what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. That really means a lot, Adelle. I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mental Insights podcast. Please screenshot this episode and share any insights that you may have learned throughout this conversation. Please like, subscribe, and review the Mental Insights podcast on whichever streaming platform you are listening on. I appreciate your support, and please share this amongst anyone who you believe should subscribe to the Mental Insights podcast. Thank you all for listening. This has been your host, Brennan Catuli of the Mental Insights podcast.